Ever made like a really, really bad decision under pressure? One you like totally regretted.
Oh, yeah.
Now imagine you're a king, and that bad decision like plunges your whole country into chaos for decades. That's
Wow.
basically the crazy story we're diving into today.
Okay.
The life and reign of King Charles VI of France.
Okay.
This ruler, his mental illness, really messed things up for his kingdom.
It's a fascinating case. Really is. It's tragic, too, how, personal struggles can just completely change the fate of a nation.
Totally, yeah. And we're going to uncover some pretty surprising details about like medieval life and political intrigue, even a
Wow.
super bizarre royal ball that went like horribly wrong.
I've heard about this. Can't wait to hear more.
Yeah, so get ready because this deep dive into Charles VI's life is a wild one.
Looking forward to it.
And hey, if you're into these like historical deep dives, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Let's do.
All right, so let's start with Charles VI's early life.
Okay.
He became king when he was just 11 years old after his father died. Can you even imagine inheriting like that much responsibility at 11?
I mean, that's incredible. It was pretty common, though, back then for monarchs to get the throne young,
Right.
but they were rarely ready to, actually rule.
Yeah, makes sense.
So in Charles VI's case, his uncles, they stepped in as regents,
Oh, okay.
but their ambition really overshadowed their duty to both the young king and France.
That's rough.
Mhm.
So these uncles weren't exactly the best role models. They hiked up taxes and even withheld payments to troops.
Yeah, they did. They basically set the stage for revolts and unrest.
It's like they were asking for trouble.
They really were. And their actions highlight this challenge we see throughout history, keeping power in check. They just wanted personal gain and completely ignored the people they were supposed to serve.
And that led to some disastrous consequences.
Absolutely.
So France is dealing with an economic crisis and incompetent leadership.
Yeah, not a good start.
Not at all. Then at 16, Charles VI is married off to Isabella of Bavaria.
Another power move. Typical for royal alliances at the time.
Yeah, just another pawn in the game.
Sadly, it was rarely about love. More about strategic partnerships and consolidating power.
Right. Makes sense. But then things actually take a turn for the better when Charles VI finally takes control at 21.
Okay.
He appoints these advisors known as the marmosets,
Interesting.
and they were surprisingly effective.
Oh, wow. So under the marmosets, there's stability and prosperity. Quite a contrast to his uncles.
Right. A total 180.
Yeah, it really shows how important competent leadership is for a nation.
Big time. Charles VI even gets the nickname Charles the Beloved during this time.
Wow, what a turnaround from those early years.
It really is.
Yeah.
Sadly, though, this peace and progress doesn't last.
Oh no, what happened?
In 1392, a seemingly insignificant thing on a hot summer day changes everything.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So picture this.
Mm-hmm.
Charles VI is riding with his entourage to Brittany.
Okay.
It's a scorching summer day. Suddenly, this man, some say he was a leper, others a beggar, appears out of nowhere, jumps right in front of the king's horse, and shouts, "Thou art betrayed."
Whoa. That's creepy.
Right, so this sudden warning, probably fueled by the man's own instability, spooks the king's horse.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But what happens next?
Well, a page, maybe drowsy from the heat, falls asleep and drops his lance.
Oh.
The lance hits a helmet and makes this loud clang.
Yeah.
And for some reason, this just completely sends Charles VI into a violent episode.
Wow. So this is like the first sign of his mental health really deteriorating.
Exactly. And it's a condition that's going to stick with him for the rest of his life.
That's really sad.
Yeah, so he draws his sword and attacks his own men, kills one soldier and injures others.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine the chaos and fear?
I can't even imagine. It's a truly shocking turning point, not only for Charles VI personally, but
Right.
for the future of France.
Yeah, no doubt. So
Yeah.
what caused this breakdown?
Well, historians have a few theories.
Okay.
Some say it's the stress of ruling.
Okay.
Others blame the heat that day or maybe an underlying illness.
Right.
Some even think it's the psychological trauma of the incident itself.
It's hard to say for sure. And back in the 14th century, they didn't understand mental illness like we do today.
Right.
Charles VI's condition would have been met with fear and confusion.
Totally. Maybe even superstition.
Oh, absolutely. So those around Charles VI, they really struggled to deal with his erratic behavior. And that just added to the political instability that was already brewing.
It's like a recipe for disaster.
It really is. That lack of understanding had huge consequences, not just for the king, but for the whole kingdom.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of instability, let's talk about the Ball of the Burning Men.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this. Sounds crazy.
It happened just a few years after the incident in Brittany.
Okay.
And it really shows how precarious Charles VI's mental health was becoming.
So this ball was supposed to be a distraction for the king,
Yeah, like a way to cheer him up.
but it turned into a nightmare.
A total nightmare. So picture this, the king and 5 knights, they decide to dress up as wild men for a dance.
Wild men. Okay.
Yeah, their costumes were made of linen, pitch, and flax. Super flammable stuff.
Oh, this isn't going to end well.
It doesn't. So the king's brother, the Duke of Orleans, shows up late carrying a torch.
Oh, no.
He gets too close to the disguised men trying to figure out who they are.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
And boom, accidentally sets one of them on fire.
Oh my gosh.
The flames just engulf all the wild men, including the king.
The king. Was he okay?
Luckily, a young duchess recognized him and shielded him with her skirts. Saved his life.
Wow, that's a close call.
It is. But the other men weren't so lucky.
Oh no.
They suffered horrific burns and died.
Oh, that's just awful. This whole thing must have really shaken the French court.
It did. People started questioning the king's safety and the people around him.
Yeah, and the Duke of Orleans.
He was devastated. He actually did public penance for his role in the tragedy.
Wow. But even with that, the damage was done.
It was. The Ball of the Burning Men was a major turning point. What started with hope and promise now had this dark cloud of fear and uncertainty hanging over it.
Yeah, with his mental illness becoming impossible to ignore, it really set the stage for the political turmoil that engulfed France.
Exactly. Before we move on, I want to remind everyone that we're talking about a king whose reign was like totally messed up by mental illness.
Right.
It's a story that shows us like how tricky leadership can be,
Yeah.
how fragile power is,
Absolutely.
and the human cost of these big historical events.
It's a good reminder, too, of how far we've come in understanding and treating mental illness.
Yeah, totally. Back in Charles VI's time, they had like no idea about the causes or how to treat it effectively.
You know, they really didn't.
We talked earlier about Charles VI getting the nickname Charles the Beloved.
All right.
But as his mental health got worse, it was really sad because he couldn't even connect with his own family.
It's really heartbreaking to think about a king who was known for being kind and caring, becoming a stranger to the people he loved most.
Yeah, it's tragic. I mean, when he was lucid, Charles VI was totally devoted to his wife and kids, but the illness just created this huge gap between them.
A real disconnect.
Yeah, there's stories about him being distant and even mean to his wife, Queen Isabel.
Oh, wow.
But then he gets super close to his sister-in-law, the Duchess of Orleans.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and that favoritism toward his sister-in-law caused a lot of drama in the court.
Makes sense. I mean, some people saw it as another sign that he was losing it mentally,
Right.
while others, like the Duke of Burgundy, used it to stir up trouble and grab more power for themselves.
Classic power move.
It really is.
And that power vacuum created by Charles VI's illness was like a breeding ground for rivalry and scheming.
Oh, yeah. His uncles, his son, the Dauphin, and the Dukes of Burgundy and Orleans, they all saw a chance to take control.
It's like a real-life Game of Thrones.
It really is. With the fate of France hanging in the balance, it shows how internal fighting can weaken a nation and leave it open to threats from outside.
Yeah, for sure. And then Charles VI's episodes of madness, they just made the political mess even worse.
Right.
His delusions got weirder and more disturbing, pushing him further away from anyone who could have helped him.
There are stories about him thinking he was made of glass.
Made of glass.
Yeah, he was terrified of shattering.
Wow.
So he wore padded clothes and tried not to make any sudden movements.
That's wild. It's hard to imagine a king, like the ruler of a powerful country, struggling with that kind of fear.
It really highlights the impact mental illness can have on someone's reality.
Yeah, totally. It reminds us to be empathetic and understanding.
Absolutely.
And there were times when he refused to bathe or change clothes for months.
Oh, wow.
Clearly, his illness was taking a toll on him physically, too.
Yeah, it's obvious he couldn't function as a king anymore.
No, he really couldn't. And these stories might seem shocking now, but they give us a glimpse into how little they understood mental illness back then.
Right. Treatments were often useless or even made things worse.
So as Charles VI's condition went downhill, the political situation in France totally spiraled out of control.
That rivalry between the Duke of Orleans and the Duke of Burgundy that had been brewing for ages finally boiled over.
This wasn't just some petty feud, though,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it was a battle for power and influence within the French court.
Okay.
The Duke of Orleans, the king's brother, was like a symbol of the old way of doing things.
Oh, I see.
And the Duke of Burgundy wanted to change all that.
Ah, so he was a threat to the established order.
Exactly. And this rivalry had deadly consequences.
Oh, no, what happened?
In 1407, the Duke of Orleans was murdered right on the streets of Paris.
Whoa.
And it was all planned by the Duke of Burgundy.
That's cold.
It really was. This event was a huge turning point. It sparked a civil war that made France even weaker.
Oh, man. So now France is facing like a triple whammy.
Right.
A king who's basically incapacitated by mental illness.
Yeah.
A country ripped apart by civil war.
Mm-hmm.
And a powerful enemy just waiting to take advantage of their weakness.
And that enemy was England, led by the young and ambitious King Henry V.
Uh-oh.
He saw this as his chance to grab the French throne. So we left off with France in a really bad spot, weakened by all the infighting and facing England. This is where the 100 Years' War, which had already been going on forever, takes a major turn.
Yeah, with France so vulnerable, Henry V saw his chance to go for the French throne.
He really did.
And the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, that was just devastating for the French.
It was a total disaster for them, a humiliating defeat that just cemented England's power. Really shows what happens when you have internal divisions and weak leadership.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how demoralized the French must have felt after that loss. Their king's struggling with mental illness, a country's divided, and now they get crushed by their biggest enemy.
It was a dark time for them, but there was this glimmer of hope that came from a really unexpected place.
Oh, really?
A young peasant woman named Joan of Arc.
Joan of Arc. Now, that's a name everyone knows.
Her story is incredible. She said she had these divine visions telling her to support the Dauphin Charles VI's son and his claim to the throne.
Oh.
And her faith and charisma, it really rallied. The French troops gave them a sense of purpose again.
It's amazing to think how this young woman from, nowhere became a symbol of French resistance.
She totally did, and her impact on the war was huge. She led the French to some major victories, which ultimately helped the Dauphin become King Charles VII.
It's a reminder that even in the worst situations, hope can come from anywhere.
It really is. Sadly, though, Joan of Arc's story doesn't have a happy ending.
Oh, no. What happened?
She was captured by the Burgundians who were on England's side.
Oh, no.
And they burned her at the stake in 1431.
Oh, that's terrible. But her legacy lived on, right?
Absolutely. She became a national hero, a symbol of France's strength and faith.
So what about Charles VI?
Well, he died in 1422,
Okay.
still King of France, but because of the Treaty of Troyes, which he signed during one of his lucid moments, his own son was cut off. And Henry V of England was named his heir.
That's crazy.
It was a tough pill to swallow for the French, but that's how bad things were. It really shows how complicated Charles VI's reign was, with those moments of clarity mixed with confusion.
But what's surprising is that even after all the mental illness and chaos he caused, when Charles VI died, the French people really mourned him.
Yeah, it shows the strange connection he had with his people. Even after years of hardship, they still had some love for the guy who had once been a symbol of hope for them.
It's like history is never simple, right? Even a ruler who went through so much turmoil could still leave a positive mark on people.
That's true. And even though the Treaty of Troyes seemed like it would give England control of France, Charles VI's son, the Dauphin, he wasn't giving up.
Good for him.
Inspired by Joan of Arc, he fought back and eventually took his rightful place as king.
So what can we learn from Charles VI, the Mad King?
Well, his story is a cautionary tale about how easily power can slip away, how damaging war and internal fighting can be, and what happens when we don't understand mental illness. But it also shows us that hope can appear when we least expect it. And even when things are really bad, the human spirit can overcome anything.
Charles VI's life was full of tragedy, but there were moments of inspiration too. He was a king loved by his people, but also weighed down by his illness. A ruler who really reflected the crazy times he lived in.
His story reminds us to be kind and understanding and to learn from past mistakes.
That's a great takeaway. Well, that's our deep dive into the life of Charles VI. We hope you found it as interesting as we did. And if you like these journeys into history, don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more stories about history's most fascinating people. See you next time.